So without any further ado, and a huge shout out to our C.H.A.R.G.E families and all of our great participants from the C.H.A.R.G.E family out there. Minnie, thank you so much for your help. I saw that you were on here as well from South Carolina. So a big, big thank you. We had David Brown just on Tuesday, and we're excited to have Tim today. So Tim, the floor is yours, and I will be popping in just to let you know in the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes, we're going to go ahead and do interpreter switch, okay? In the meantime, floor is yours. You take care. Enjoy.
All right, thank you. And thank you everybody for attending. It's an honor to be here. I've been looking over the program of webinars and it's a great lineup. Really some terrific people will be speaking and I'm just honored to be a part of that. For those who don't know me or anything about me, my main expertise is in the area of C.H.A.R.G.E syndrome because I have a son with C.H.A.R.G.E syndrome. You'll see some pictures of him. But you know, because I'm involved with C.H.A.R.G.E, it kind of makes you involved with deaf blindness. And so I've been getting more and more involved in the deaf blind world as well. So the presentation today, while a lot of my focus is on, it comes out of my C.H.A.R.G.E experiences, I've made it really clear that I'm applying to deaf blindness in general. So I have a PowerPoint prepared for you and I will share my screen and bring it up. It takes a moment to get it to start working. There. So if there are any problems along the way, I'm sure that Marilyn will jump in and let me know that there are issues. But so the topic is supporting positive behavior in your child. And you know, the area of behavior has been a particular concern to me. And I think it's a concern of everybody's, not just related to children who might be deafblind or might have C.H.A.R.G.E syndrome, but to all of our children. I've been the parent of 7 children and I know a little bit about behavior. All children behave. And so it's not a surprise that our kids who might be deafblind might also have certain kinds of behaviors. In fact, really, all mammals behave, and I wanted to show you this brief clip.
This is the beast. This is the beast's behavior. This is how the beast gets exercise. Here he comes. Dewey. Dewey. Dewey, what's wrong with you?
All right, so Dewey is a dog, and Dewey is behaving the way dogs very often do. And in spite the narrator is saying, what's the matter with you, Dewey? Is Dewey behaving any way other than we would expect a dog to behave? Now, maybe we don't want the dog to behave in that way in the house. Maybe we have to do some more training. But when we get to our kids who are not so-called typical children, when they start doing things, we start saying, well, this is weird. And on top of it being weird, we want to label it something. So, well, maybe he has autism, right? I mean, so that's my son Jacob during his frog period, when he actually knows how to croak like a frog really well. And so I thought that when he started painting himself like this, he might be morphing into one. One day at the park, he was sticking his tongue out. I thought maybe catching flies, I wasn't sure. But, you know, he's enjoying himself. He's exploring with his finger paints and exploring different ways that he can apply finger paints besides the way that we think is, quote, appropriate. So is it weird? Is it not weird? But because Jacob has a disability, then we start thinking, well, because there seems to be a presumption that if behavior of someone with disabilities is weird, it must be part of a diagnosis, right? Autism or whatever you want to call it. It can have little or no meaning. There's no meaning behind it. He's just doing something weird. And it's out of the child's control. Because it's outside of the child's control, we have no expectations then for them to do anything different. I mean, this is just the way they are because of the diagnosis that they have and because they have a disability. So let me give you an example of how this operates a little bit. So this I call walking the floor with Jacob. So this is my wife with her son Jacob some 30 years ago. And what we discovered with Jacob is that he got very, very fussy when we were holding him. That's really a problem, of course, as a parent, right? Because when you hold your child, the main thing you want is for your child to be comforted by you holding them. I remember one night very, very clearly when Jacob was just crying. He was no more than what you see in the picture here in terms of age. And we were doing everything we could think of, walking with him, shaking him, burping him, all the different kinds of things you would do. Remember, my father-in-law came over and he was trying because he thought he could do anything. He's from Scotland, and I think the Scottish think they can cure all things, but it was impossible. And finally, I was holding him in exasperation. I just put Jacob down on the floor, and immediately he stopped crying. That was weird, yes, but it also taught me something, that I don't know what Jacob really needs, what Jacob really chooses. If you think about it, why did Jacob behave that way? Well, today I would say, well, maybe touch was painful to him. Many kids who are deafblind, and certainly many kids who have C.H.A.R.G.E, are very tactile defensive when they're born. That is, that the touch can be very painful, especially light touch, especially in certain parts of their body. So maybe that was the problem, that the touch was just more than he could handle. Or maybe being carried was confusing his senses. He couldn't get any sense of stability because we kept on moving him and repositioning him. Lying on the floor is certainly a lot more stable. He doesn't have to worry about his world kind of moving around too much. And essentially, maybe this is just his preference. Now, we all have preferences. Some people like touch, some people don't like touch. Some people like hugs, some people don't like hugs. Jacob likes to lie on the floor. He's quite content there. But it took us a while to figure this out and to understand it. In fact, a few years later, when my daughter was born and she was getting fussy, I would try putting her down. It didn't work. I had to relearn that, oh no, when Katie's fussy, I should pick her up. I'd been taught differently, but it still recognizes that kids have different preferences. But it's really hard to not know how to comfort your child, and that makes us anxious, right? And that anxiety, of course, is picked up on by the child, and things don't get any better. So there's challenges involved. So in terms of the evolution of my thoughts, Jacob avoided social contact as an infant, and this really disturbed us. And a psychologist friend of mine came to see us and brought this book, Deafblind Infants and Children. And as we read it, described Jacob's behavior so well. And so we began to see him as a person who is deafblind, having a disability, and not as a diagnosis, not as autistic. I think the behavior, and certainly in C.H.A.R.G.E syndrome, is more than just the deafblindness, because there are many other factors associated. But I don't like them being called autistic, because I don't think that gets us anywhere from understanding that everybody behaves and people figure out how they're going to behave. Several years ago now, quite a few now, I was doing some research on behavior, and I asked Beth Kennedy, who's our deafblind consultant here in Michigan, I said, Beth, give me a list of common deafblind behaviors. And this is the list that she gave me. Look at it, there's a bunch of weird behavior here, right? But as you think about each of the behaviors, well, eye pressing, if you press your eyes, you get a flash. That's kind of interesting. Finger flicking, well, I might do finger flicking my fingers in front of a light because it creates lights and shadows, and it's really kind of interesting. Rocking, to kind of keep track of my body and keeping it moving. I'm rocking right now at the moment because it actually works really well in terms of keeping one calm and organized. tapping one's body or objects. You know, if you watch people, they're doing it all day long. Self-injurious behavior is certainly a big problem. But all of these can be problems, especially when they do a lot of it. Feces smearing, for example, not one of my favorites because I spent a lot of years dealing with that with Jacob. But I still had to think about these behaviors maybe being associated with sensory issues and not associated with a diagnosis. But that's what we want to do. You know, we have a dog running around like crazy. Do we want to give the dog a diagnosis? No, the dog's running around like crazy because it's working for the dog. And perhaps our kids are doing some of these behaviors because in some sense it's working for them. So what's the difference? So behavior is learned. Of course behavior is learned. You know, we learn all sorts of behaviors because of our experience and the lessons that it teaches us, basic reinforcement, if you want to think about it that way. You know, if my dog comes in from the yard into our house, turns around and stares at me because my dog has learned that most of the time when she comes in, I will give her a dog biscuit as a treat. She didn't choose this behavior. She learned the behavior because I kept reinforcing it by giving her a dog biscuit. A lot of our behaviors are just pretty much stuff that we've learned because it's been reinforced and it's working for us, but we didn't choose it. But there's other behaviors which I believe we do choose. You all saw David Brown on Tuesday. This is something that he and I have been talking about for a long, long time, since we met back in '96. And, you know, David's a really good observer of behavior. And as he observes the behavior, he begins to see the intelligence behind the behavior, the choosing behind the behavior. So kids not only are taught, but some things they just choose for themselves because it seems to solve a problem for them. And I think this is really, really important if you want to understand how to raise a child with deaf blindness, is to understand some of the behaviors that they've chosen and the reasons they've chosen them. So if you think about the behavior of the child, you can think about what is the purpose? Why would they choose this particular one? And what is it communicating to me? I don't know that kids choose behaviors necessarily to communicate something to us, but oftentimes you can watch that behavior and say, I think that means that this is what's going on inside of the person, and that's why they're engaging in this behavior. So you can ask yourself, what's functional about the behavior? How does it help them? How does it help them to smear their feces? That's kind of a tough one. I'm going to come back to that one in a minute. How does it help them to finger flick? Did any of you teach your kids who finger flick to finger flick? Probably not, but they chose that. So what's the purpose of that and what's it communicating to us? You can ask yourself, why is the child willing to accept the consequences? You know, with typical kids even, you know, sometimes they do something that they know is naughty, but you see that glint in their eye. They know it's coming afterwards, but it was so worth it. So why would our kids do certain things that there are going to be consequences for, like the feces smearing, but they're willing to accept that consequence because it's interesting enough to them? So I want you to think about behavior as often being the creative solution the child develops to cope with their situation. This is how I've worked it out. If I do this, this will help to solve a situation that I'm experiencing. So here's an example. This is a typical C.H.A.R.G.E syndrome behavior. I'm pretty darn sure that the parents did not teach this kid to look at the iPad by being upside down. Be very unlikely. So why in the world would the kid do this? Well, maybe the kid's autistic, right? Maybe the kid's just weird. No, maybe this solves a problem for them. And one of the things that you may or may not know about C.H.A.R.G.E syndrome is that there's a vestibular issue. Balance problems are off. And when balance problems are prevalent, It means that the head is not always stable. Do you know how much work it is to hold your head upright? The muscles in your neck really have to work hard to hold your head up. And when you're having to really do that extra because your head is unbalanced, if you hang upside down, your head becomes much more stable. You can try it now because I can't see you anyway. But if you just hang over the side for a moment, see how stable your head becomes, because it's hanging. The muscles aren't required to hold it up, and there's no real vestibular issue. This kid's head is grounded, but still the head is stable. When the head is stable, that helps the vision, because one of the problems with vestibular problems is that the eyes are no longer coordinated. And so when your head is stable, suddenly your eyes are able to focus on an object. Also, this kid having C.H.A.R.G.E probably has coloboma, which means missing part of the eye, and usually on the retina, and those usually block out the upper visual field. Well, we look a lot of the time, that's why bifocals, you have the looking down at the bottom, we look out through the top of our eyes. So if that's blocked, if you're upside down, now you're looking straight out like you'd like to. Also, this kid is getting much more feedback from his body because he's leaning up against the couch. He's getting some nice proprioceptive feedback of where his body is. So this is a very, very creative solution to the problems that this kid experiences due to the sensory impairments. And you know, this is so common in C.H.A.R.G.E. I emailed it or posted on Facebook one time saying, do you have pictures of your kid hanging upside down? And by the end of the day, I had 85 pictures. This is just a selection of them. They're all do it. I can't say all because you can never say all with C.H.A.R.G.E. So it's clearly something that we parents didn't get together and said, hey, let's teach our kids how to hang upside down and then reinforce it. No, they've chosen this. They've chosen it because it works for them. Our problem as parents and professionals is to figure out, what is it doing for them? Why would they choose that particular behavior? And if you can figure that out, then it makes sense. And then if you want to teach them a different behavior, which is more socially appropriate, you can go ahead and do that. But first of all, you got to figure out what it's doing for them. So a child chooses a behavior to solve their situation, and then it works. And so they keep doing it, of course. Or maybe it doesn't work, but the reaction of other people maintains the behavior. I'll give you an example in a moment of that, which is pulling gastrostomy buttons out, which I can explain, but that's not an uncommon behavior. Or it's reinforced by the reaction of others, and so it becomes a habit and no longer chosen. So obviously I'm saying things don't get learned, but if you engage in something because it solves a problem for you, and everybody reacts strongly to you, oh, this is kind of cool. If I want a strong reaction, all I have to do is engage in this behavior. And then after a while, it becomes a habit and you just do it automatically. That's why we want to figure out why they're doing it to begin with, so we can avoid something that's really unpleasant becoming a habit. So chosen behavior can be a habit based on what happens next. Sorry, interpreters, I said that too fast. This is Jacob one Halloween several years ago when he was dressed up as the old man from Up. And I just put the picture in there because of the balloons, but the story is not to do with Jacob, but I did consult with a family whose kid was obsessed with balloons. And it starts off going to Walmart where they had a balloon stand. And the kid wants a balloon, so of course mom buys him a balloon. And that satisfies him initially, but as they go back to Walmart, you know, he expects the balloon every time. He'll go and stand in front of the balloon counter. And not only now does he want one balloon, but he wants all the balloons that are blown up there. And if he doesn't get all the balloons, then he starts having a temper tantrum, which is a very unpleasant thing to have in a store, especially if your kid has a disability. So the chosen behavior becomes a habit because it keeps on getting reinforced. Every time that I stand there, now mom gets me all the balloons because mom wants to avoid what happens next. Of course, then what happens, mom stopped taking the kid to Walmart, which, you know, makes perfect kind of sense. But what was interesting about the balloon, and are there some other ways of finding something that's interesting within Walmart besides the balloons. What we actually did is we gave the kid a list of 3 things to do at Walmart. And after he did them, he could have more time on the computer, or he could get a balloon. And the kid rushed through Walmart, grabbing the things that were on the list, and then went home to work on the computer because that's what he really wanted. So there are ways when you understand what's going on that you can change it. Breaking TVs. I've known several kids who for some reason really like to break TVs. I don't know why the parents kept buying new TVs, but it became a pattern of breaking the TVs. So why might that start in the first place? Why would the kid be watching TV on the couch and suddenly run over there and smash it? Well, the sensory overload can happen pretty quickly. And so maybe there was just too much stimulation going on in the environment. And so as that built up, the kid kind of lost their cool, ran over there and smashed the TV because that solved their problem. And it certainly did solve their problem. Of course, they got a huge reaction afterwards, right? But they also got a new TV. So next time the sensory systems are getting overloaded, I know just what to do, and eventually can become a habit. Feces smearing is a tough one. I never thought that'd be an issue that I would be dealing with for a long time. But of course, it solved a problem for Jacob, because if you have something in your pants, it kind of helps to kind of pull it out. So part of the solution is to figure, if that's the reason, is to make sure that we have the potty better timed and sequenced so that he goes regularly and goes on the pot and not in his pants. And that's only part of the solution. But the other part of it is figuring out why he wanted to paint himself with it afterwards. So just like he did it with the green green paints, he would paint himself with his feces. And, part of the reason we decided was the texture. And so we went to finger paints. We went to shaving cream. We went to Play-Doh to give him other opportunities. If this is solving a tactile problem for him, then let's give him alternatives to the feces smearing. And that seemed to work as well. The third thing that we did, going back to it becoming a habit, or just chosen, because what usually happened after Jacob smeared himself was he got in the bathtub to get it cleaned off. The problem is that Jacob loves baths. If he feels like he wants a bath, then one of the best ways to solve that problem is to feces smear, because then he's going to get one. So we decided no more baths. We would give a shower afterwards, which he hated. So a combination of those things, he stopped feces smearing. The button pulling, so a lot of the kids are fed directly into their stomach through gastrostomy. So all the liquid goes through a tube into the stomach, and there's a little tab right outside the stomach, which you open up and stick the tube into, and that's called the button. And some of the kids, when they get really upset, will grab that button and yank it out. That's not a pleasant experience for parents because they panic. I've been told you have about 20 minutes to be able to get that button back in before you have to go to the hospital and have it surgically put back in. I haven't tested that. In fact, Jacob didn't do this actually, but I wouldn't want to test that very far. But how do you react to something like this? Well, why would they be pulling it out? Well, initially, it may be because there's a lot of discomfort around it. Sometimes the skin around the button can get kind of inflamed. It may be also something that they reach for when they're hungry. It may just be kind of pleasant to have a piece of plastic sticking out of you. But the reaction is incredible. So we have to recognize that when the kid is pulling the button out, it's probably solving a problem for them. Now, maybe it's just a way of expressing anger. I choose to be angry, and I'm going to let my mom know or my dad know exactly how angry I am by pulling that button out. And that will work. And, mom and dad will be panicked and probably angry. And you get a tremendous reaction. So the only way I've been able to figure out working on this particular one is to make sure that it's good hygiene around the button so that it's not inflamed. Getting the kid involved in self-feeding as much as possible, so they're engaged with the button. But then if it is pulled out, to react very, very calmly. Because if you get upset, that's just going to encourage more button pulling.
Hey, Tim, let's go ahead and do an interpreter switch.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, good to go. Thank you.
All right, so understand the behavior first. I don't know if David showed this slide. It's one of his favorite slides. But it's of Jacob preparing to go for a walk, probably. And he's got his coat on. He's sitting patiently in his chair, looking pretty cool with the glasses that he probably took off the face of one of his caregivers, because they're not his. But I don't know if you can notice that he's pressing his fingers very, very tightly together. And he's also got his mouth very much pinched. And this is giving him really great proprioceptive feedback. He's knowing where his body is in space. If you press your fingers together tightly like that, you will feel it in your fingers, in your wrists, in your arms, elbows, shoulders, even the back of your neck. And if you press your lips together, you're getting it through your jaw, your face, even into your neck there. So while he's spending some time, he's waiting, he's actually using that time to prepare to be able to get up and walk when he's going to really have to know where his body is in space, which is the proprioceptive issue. So as I thought over the years about why kids with C.H.A.R.G.E in particular have such tremendous behavioral issues, I ultimately came up with this model right here. But it doesn't just apply to C.H.A.R.G.E, it applies to I think most kids who are deafblind, because they typically have other things going on with them as well. And certainly they have the sensory issues and the anxiety. So the three main issues that I think about: one is pain, another sensory issues, third is anxiety, and that's self-regulation in the middle, because that's kind of how we resolve some of the issues here. So let me go through this. So I'll give you a quick story, I'll try to make it quick, of Jacob's ear. So there was a December, it was right after Christmas actually, as I recall, that Jacob's had an increasingly difficult time going to sleep at night. Now, sleep's an issue that I'm sure all of you face with your kids from time to time, especially kids with deafblindness. But this was unusual for Jacob, because he would get into bed, lie down, and then in 10 minutes he would get up. He would finally fall asleep, but it took longer and longer each night. So my wife took him to the doctor. The doctor looked him over, checked his ears, a little bit of wax in his ears, but couldn't see anything that was a problem, and said, well, maybe we need to prescribe some medication for sleep. And Nancy came home with Jacob and said, he wants to prescribe medication. I said, no way. This is unusual behavior. It is communicating something to us. I don't know why he's chosen, if you want to use that word, I didn't back then, but to not be able to sleep. What is going on? He's lying down and then getting up. So it got worse and worse. Nancy went back to the doctor. The doctor looked him over and said, oh, that's not wax in his ear. That's something else. I don't know what that is in his ear, but it's some kind of foreign object. So we tried to get a hold of his ENT, but ENT was on vacation, and the substitute ENT said, well, after the new year, I can schedule something. But Jacob now was not sleeping at night at all. So we took him to the emergency room and held him down, and the doctor pulled out the foreign object in his ear. I don't know what it was. And of course that was painful, but now Jacob could sleep. How hard it is to sleep when you're in pain. I mean, pain can affect normal brain and neurological development. Kids who are constantly in pain don't grow normally and neurologically. It can affect your sleep, as it was with Jacob. I mean, every time he lay down, it was rubbing against his eardrum and causing excruciating pain. That's why he would choose to sit up, because sitting up would relieve the pressure on the eardrum. When you're in pain, you don't want to explore the environment and learn anything. It can interfere with the development of attachment and trust. How can I attach to somebody or trust somebody when I'm constantly hurting? It can become tolerated over time and even to a certain extent ignored, but it's still affecting you. It's still affecting your health and behavior, even if you're not paying attention to it. All right, moving on to sensory systems, and don't worry about the picture there. Just want to mention the brain. If the brain had no sensory systems to tell it what's going on, the brain can't do anything. It sits in there in the dark, If it can't see, hear, taste, smell, touch, what can it do? It's completely dependent on the senses. And this is why the senses are so incredibly important for all of us. These are the sensory deficits you see in C.H.A.R.G.E. And that's why C.H.A.R.G.E is called a multisensory deficit syndrome, because hearing is impacted, vision is impacted, smell is also impacted in most kids with C.H.A.R.G.E because of the issues with hormones, actually, that lead to sex hormones, surprisingly, but affects the sense of smell. Taste, they often prefer strong taste because smell is affected. As I said before, the tactile defensive, it can be very painful to get touched in certain places. The balance system is off. And the proprioceptive system that tells you where your muscles and where your body is in space can be off. So what's the brain making, how's the brain making sense out of anything out there in the world when all of these are off? Even if it's just hearing and vision that are off, that's huge. Those are most important senses. So sensory processing problems when the brain can't make sense out of all of this. Well, it's frequently occurring in genetic syndromes, for one thing. It's exacerbated by sensory impairments. There are kids who have sensory processing problems with intact sensory systems. In the case of our kids, we do not have intact sensory systems. And so the whole problem for the brain is exacerbated. It's very much associated with anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder, because the brain is trying to figure out some way to control the environment. And because if I can't figure out what's going on, I get anxious. And the best way to control my anxiety is to exercise some control. Even incidental sensory events may overload the child. So, you may think the kid's handling it really well, but then something happens. Some kid walks by and just creates some air as they leave their space moving by. That can cause the kid to overload. It can lead to sensory self-stimulation, a lot of it. And we need to learn how to intervene very carefully to avoid meltdowns. I watched a girl who was exercising in the gym at her school, and she was using weights. Well, she sat in a chair and used the arm weights. And it was very noisy in there. They're playing blasting music. People were running around. People were shouting. And I watched as she just gradually, you could see the expression on her face change as she had a meltdown and lost complete behavioral control. It took three people to get her back to her classroom. I was there as an observer, so I wasn't responsible. But you have to intervene very carefully in these situations when you can see the sensory processing problems develop. All right, anxiety. What could our kids possibly have to be anxious about? Well, this day and age, we have lots to be anxious about, right? Last spring semester, before COVID hit, I was actually still in January, I asked the students in my undergraduate class, what percentage of kids in college do you think have severe anxiety? And the first response I got was about 110%. So it's common. But what are there additional things that our kids might have to be anxious about? So here's a brief definition of anxiety: a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. If you are deafblind, maybe you're lying on the couch or lying in your bed, maybe you're self-stimming with some of your toys, but you know that sometimes things suddenly happen. And so there may be some tension involved in waiting how long before somebody's going to come by and get me up and make me do something. And what will that be? What will be the outcome of what they want me to do? Maybe they're going to take me out and stick me in the car. If they stick me in the car, are we going 5 minutes to the store? Are we going 10 hours to grandma's house? What's happening? So you can see where I'm leading to the importance of being able to communicate for our kids what is happening and what is going to happen. Here's just a list of behaviors that you can see with anxiety. And I highlighted the second one because I don't think people often think about this, that anger, aggression, restlessness, irritability, tantrums, defiance can all stem from anxiety. Of course, they can stem from other things as well. But if we think there's any chance our kid might experience anxiety and our kid shows anger or aggression or tantrums or defiance, well, maybe we really need to pay attention to this anxiety. Now, I won't go through the whole list here, but you can see there's a lot of different kinds of behaviors related to anxiety. Think about the passage of time. You know, from when you got up this morning, what was your plan for the day? And you had a plan for the day, right? Which you had some degree of control over. To when you get home this evening, what are your future plans? What do you want to do? I'm going to plop in front of the TV, thank you. And then reflecting back on the day. Wow, the presentation was great. Hint, hint. But reflecting back on the day, and that's so much of what we talk about, isn't it? When we get up, we talk to other people. So what are you going to be doing today? Oh, what'd you do? What are you doing this evening? How was it? Time is ever present in our conversations. We like to know what's going on. What are we doing right now? Well, we're in a presentation. What are we going to do next? I'm going to go home. What did we just do? I won't go through my day. It was pretty crazy. I actually take my dog for surgery, but she's done fine. But it's an hour and a half drive to the center, so that was crazy. But I know about these things, right? But if you're deaf-blind, are you aware of what's happening right now? What's going on in the world around you? Or are you closing in to just focus on the one toy that you might be looking at? What are you going to do next? Has anybody communicated that to you? What did you do before? Did anybody help you think back about what you just did? When we're not sure about time, we become anxious. We engage in behavior which expresses our feelings, and I gave you that list. It can be anger and aggression. We engage in behavior activities that help us feel more secure, which might be curling up on my bed. I mean, when was the last time when you were highly anxious that you went into your room, curled up on your side, and sucked your thumb? All right, probably not many of you all the time, but you know, that's what we do sometimes. We want to feel the comfort of the way it was when we were children. So we need systems for tracking the passage of time. If you're not using a calendar system with your kid, please think about establishing a calendar system with your kid. You know, they don't have to be that complicated. And if you need some help, the DeafBlind projects would be so excited to be able to help you set up a calendar system for your kid. We have a pretty strict one. Like, it's set up for every shift. So Jacob, and shifts are 4 hours, and the next person comes. There's certain things that have to happen, but Jacob chooses some of the other things that he wants to do, and it's laid out in Velcro sequentially. And as they go through the activities for that shift, the Velcro piece they've just done goes off. It goes into a finish box. At the end of the shift, I don't think they do it very often, but they're supposed to. You can go back through the finish box with Jacob and say, remember, we had a break, and then we went to the toilet, and then we went up and lay on the trampoline, and then we played with finger paints, and then you had dinner. I mean, you can review those kinds of things, and that gives them the opportunity to have that conversation about time, which reduces anxiety of just not knowing what's happening. So self-regulation, here's a definition. The primarily voluntary regulation of cognition, behavior, emotion, and physiological states for the purpose of goal-directed actions. I'm a professor, I love definitions. I get that. But think about this. If you think about our systems, cognition, our thinking, does your thinking ever become dysregulated, where you're having a hard time focusing on anything because your mind is hopping all over the place? Your behavior, does behavior become dysregulated, where you're kind of running around like using the chicken with its head cut off, but you're not sure exactly what what to focus on. You've got so many things that you're behaviorally engaged in. How about your emotions? They ever all over the place. Then your physiological states. Do you have a headache? Are you able to breathe? Or are you hyperventilating? Are you able to sit in a comfortable position without being in any kind of pain? So being able to regulate these things for the purpose of goal-directed actions is what self-regulation is, but it has to be developed and learned. Human beings learn these as they grow up and engage with the world with the support of their parents and teachers. But of course, our kids don't learn by observing other people and just, picking it up. It has to be brought to them. They have to learn how to self-regulate by being taught very specifically. Not everybody's highly regulated in their life. And so here are the two ends of the spectrum: the totally regulated and the completely dysregulated. Most of us fall somewhere in between. And there's no way that we should all be perfectly regulated at all times. That's just not really very human. Nor do we want to live in a completely dysregulated environment. But it is important to be able to regulate when you need to. And so self-regulation begins with a goal. What do you want to have happen? And what must you do to make it happen? We organize all of our behaviors around our goals, goal-directed behavior. How are we going to move towards what we want? As we choose our behaviors, we're choosing our behaviors to meet a goal, as I said before. But you have to have some sense of what you want to have happen and what you must do to make it happen. So I'll give you an example. Studying for an exam, and again, as a professor, I think about these kinds of things. So I know I'm supposed to study for an exam, but what do I have to do to regulate that? Because some people, what do? They don't study for the exam. They find all sorts of reasons why they shouldn't get started. I'm really hungry right now, I need a snack. Oh, I'm tired of being in the house all day, I need a walk. Oh, I want to watch this TV show, it's only on now. I'm sure I can get the studying done later, it's not going to be a problem. Of course, it becomes a problem very often. So you think about cognitive self-regulation around studying for exam. I have to turn my brain on to thinking. I have to think. I need to look at my materials. I need to review my materials. I need to think about the material for my class. I have to get my brain to focus on that and not on other kinds of things I might want to think about instead, like the football game or the date I'm hoping to have this weekend. I need to get my thinking focused on what I need to learn. Behaviorally, I need to get myself to sit in a position where I can actually look at the materials. So, I can't be getting up all the time and moving around. I have to be able to sit. Some people may study standing, I don't care, but you have to have your behavior oriented towards the behaviors necessarily to study. Emotions. Anxiety, of course, is one that gets in the way of studying a lot of time because people can have too much anxiety. And that makes it really difficult for them to concentrate, or they have too little anxiety, and therefore they don't really look much at all. But recognizing the emotions and controlling those emotions so that I can study is important. And physiologically, I need to be comfortable. I need to be able to, now the girl in the top picture is holding her head up to watch, the girl in the bottom picture is giving up. But physiologically, what do I have to do? It will be important to have eaten something. It will be important to have slept. And to organize my body around taking care of those basic needs of eating, sleeping, toileting, whatever, be very helpful in terms of studying for an exam. Now, most of the time we don't think about all of these, but they're very important. So strategies, what are some strategies for this? Well, first of all, I have this one. There are many kinds of goals. I thought that picture was so cute. I took it at the German conference. I don't know which of the German conferences it was at, but those are brothers, and the kid with C.H.A.R.G.E syndrome is pushing his brother on the wagon and really having a wonderful time, but much better under control than he had been before people made the choice for him. Why don't you push your brother around? And he chose to go along with that. So in terms of goals, awareness is really important. What I have to know that I want to accomplish something before I can accomplish it, right? So one of the things we do is we help kids learn to be aware of what it is that they want to achieve. What is it they want to be able to do? The next thing is persistence. You have to stick with stuff. Not everything happens quickly. And so how can we teach kids to become more persistent in working on the issues that they might need for their development or learning or whatever it is? Of course, socially appropriate goals is a good thing, and some of the goals the kids have are not necessarily socially appropriate, like feces smearing. Keep going back to that one, don't I? So that's also something that has to be taught. And then just being in a state of self-control, self-regulation overall is really important if you want to achieve something. So thinking about self-regulation of some of these systems, first, self-regulation of pain. One of the problems with pain is pain anxiety and pain catastrophizing. You develop a pain and you decide that means you probably have 6 months to live, particularly in the evening when pain seems to be a bit worse and anxiety goes up. That anxiety and catastrophizing does not help with the self-regulation of pain, because we begin to lose control. Have you ever, this might work for you. I don't know if you can still be tickled, but probably there's a time in your life you could be tickled. And then I learned, because I had 2 older brothers, I learned how to make myself totally relaxed and they could not tickle me. It just won't work. It's the same thing here with pain anxiety and pain catastrophizing. We have to be able to get ourselves in a state where we're not so tense, but more relaxed, and actually helps reduce some of the pain. The tension, distress, nervousness, irritability that comes along with pain is a problem that self-regulation would help to reduce. Then the role of stress, because stress and pain are related. Increased pain leads to stress. Increased stress can lead to more pain. So changing our thoughts and expectations. So rather than catastrophizing, rather than being in distress, rather than getting nervous, can we find a way to change what we're thinking and changing what we're expecting to get it back under control? Meditation can be very helpful, and there's more and more people using meditation with kids who are deafblind. One of the things that seems to be very popular is yoga. Tai Chi is also very useful. And then distracting ourselves from the pain. Now, none of this gets rid of the pain, right? We still need to investigate the pain. And sometimes that's hard. I've known doctors who refuse to listen to the parent about the pain their kid was experiencing until they finally found the right doctor, did the right treatment, and the pain went away. But in the meantime, teaching the kids how to cope with their pain can be very useful to regulate it. This is the self-regulation of sensory systems. I've been talking about hanging upside down already, right? If you think about it, if my sensory systems are messed up, hanging upside down for a kid with C.H.A.R.G.E is going to help relax them. Because again, the head's going to be under control. The vision's going to be better. The body's going to be in a different, more stable, perhaps, position. This one seems unstable, but that's why I said perhaps. But it is a way of organizing sensory systems. And the problem I've run into this over the years is so many schools, teachers and others have said, no, you may not hang upside down. No, you can't do that. And this is what happened to this girl. It got so bad that they were isolating her from the class because of her meltdowns she would have when they wouldn't allow her to hang upside down. And meltdown is the right word because her sensory systems got all screwed up. And she was choosing to do something about it by choosing to hang upside down, but that was ignored. So therefore, She would have a meltdown, therefore they would have to drag her into a special part of the room behind a barrier and keep her held down as long as they needed to before she would eventually give up. Now that's why it's so incredibly important to understand why kids might choose certain kinds of behaviors. She wouldn't hang upside down for more than 10 minutes. You know, she'll come back. It's not a permanent solution. It's something that she would do to self-regulate. Self-regulation of anxiety, making life more regulated. You know, routine and predictability. I happen to like routine. My wife is not a fan. It's not that she's not a fan. She probably would tell you that, depending on her mood at the moment, that she's not much of a fan and makes life kind of boring. It does make life predictable. And that is an amazingly important way for me to manage my anxiety. You know, I used to travel a lot. I have to say used to now because I haven't been able to travel since March. But I had 3 foreign trips scheduled that spring. But I get very anxious traveling. So I've learned I have a travel routine that I go through in terms of how I pack, the way I organize my stuff, how early I get to the airport, what I do when I get to the airport. I mean, this whole thing is very much routinized, and it keeps my anxiety under control because everything's relatively predictable. And if something goes wrong, like the line for screening is way too long, and I'm not going to be in danger because I've given myself extra time to make sure that I can get through the process. Another way of thinking about anxiety is, you know, what are the things that you do to help with anxiety? I had a mom in Australia at a conference. This one was in Perth. And she raised her hand and she said, well, you know what I do for anxiety? And so when my daughter would come home from school and I could tell that her sensory systems were really, really overloaded and she was ready to explode, I would do what I do. And I'd bring her in, I'd make a cup of tea, we'd light some candles, we'd play some music, and we'd cuddle on the couch. Okay, so this becomes a routine then built into their lives to keep the anxiety from getting too overwhelming. So I want to switch here and talk about parenting more in general here. How are we doing here? Good. I should have time at the end for questions, which I was hoping to do. So it's hard enough to cope with raising a child who does not have obvious disabilities. When my oldest kid was born and they told us like the next day we could take him home, I panicked. What do you mean I can take him home? What do I know about raising a child? How do I keep him alive? Can you tell me that? Or could you just keep him here in the hospital for the next 19 years and raise him there? But they sent him home. But then why in the world would you think you should automatically know how to raise a child with tremendous needs? I mean, really, I don't know how many of your kids looked like that after they were born. Mine did. That's not mine, but it looked very similar. And what did they do? They gave us 20 minutes training on apnea monitor and suction machine and feeding tubes. We had to do gavage feeding of sticking the tube down his back of his throat into his stomach. And then sent us home with equipment and said, you're going to do great. I mean, we didn't know what the heck we were doing. So if it's hard enough with more typically developing kids, why would you ever question yourself as to why can't I do a better job with this kid? Why should you expect to? I like to think about good enough parenting. You know, I want to be a good enough parent for my kids. I don't have to be the very best parent in the whole wide world. That was my ambition. I think I've been good enough. All right, let me just say, I think I've been good enough. So first thing, make your parenting errors with confidence. All right, you're going to have to choose, just like we choose all our behaviors, right? You're going to have to choose something to do. And it might not be, quote, the right thing, but that's all right. You don't have to have chosen the right thing. You have to have chosen something, and you might as well see it through. All right, so I really like this notion of, actually, there's a parenting expert from Toronto. She and I did an article we published together on parenting children who have severe disabilities. And this was her statement, and I really like it. Make your parenting errors with confidence. Recognize there is no manual. I mean, how would you even create one to begin with? I mean, I always wanted one, and I'd like to have one. And once I was asked to give a presentation, just kind of think of it as giving them a manual for how to, you can't do that. There just isn't one. All the kids are going to be different. Your situations are different. And the choices that your kids are going to make are going to be different. You do have to trust your instincts to a certain extent, although you have to be mindful of the results. So I trusted my instincts, and boy, was that a mess. So, but I wouldn't ever say don't trust your instincts, because sometimes that really is going to be the right thing to do. Choose your battles wisely. There's some things are not worth fighting over. Kids hanging upside down, not worth fighting over. I don't know why you'd want to anyway. Kid painting himself with finger paints. That's not something that I would battle over, right? I mean, people say, oh, Tim, you really got involved in studying behavior and C.H.A.R.G.E syndrome. So Jacob's behaviors, tell me about them. And he really doesn't, he's never had any severe behavioral issues. Again, I'm pretty used to raising kids, and I see all sorts of weird behaviors. His were weird in their own unique way. But, and you might look at him and say, well, that was a difficult behavior, Tim. And maybe it's just my perception is that if Jacob walks by me and bumps into me, that's not an issue, right? It's probably not even intentional. And if it was intentional, something's going on. So we'd figure it out. So I don't think behavioral issues are inevitable, but I also don't think that a lot of it comes about what you perceive it as being. And those perceptions are what gets us into trouble. Like a temper tantrum at the grocery store. Bad enough if your kid's typically developing, but if the kid has disabilities, then it really brings everybody in. But we're still just doing what we have to do. All right. Be consistent when it matters. I do think consistency matters most of the time, unless you're finding what you're doing over and over and over again isn't working, then obviously you choose something else. But if you're inconsistent in how we respond to a behavior, the kid's going to be inconsistent in terms of when they use the behavior, because they can't figure out what's going on here. You've got to learn that if you're going to make an issue of something, like, for example, if Jacob smeared feces that we're going to wash in the sink and they get into the shower, we're going to do that every time. We can't sometimes stick it in the tub. No, it's got to be every time. Give as much freedom of choice as possible. I mean, this is just good parenting anyway. Ask kids, what choice do you want to make right now? Our kids don't get a lot of choices in their life, it turns out. Right? People choose for them. I realized I get Jacob up in the morning and I would dress him in the morning while Nancy slept in, which I was fine with. But I would hold up 2 shirts and say, which shirt do you want? And he would push one of them away. He got the other one. The more kids choose for themselves, the more confident they become. Know that children who feel good do good. So watch out for that pain issue. Always, always, always check out pain first. Understand that misbehaviors, and I should come back to that term, may be creative solutions on the part of your child. A misbehavior is a behavior someone's doing because they want to do something bad. Okay, that becomes a misbehavior. Most of the behaviors that our kids are doing they're not doing because they want to be bad. They're doing it because it's the only thing they can come up with that works for them at the moment. Even smashing the TV, I don't really view that as misbehavior as much as a compulsive behavior that developed because I had to do something about the sensory overload that I was experiencing. So think about the behavior, even if you think of it as misbehavior. Sometimes it is, absolutely. But it can't be the creative solution that your child's come up with. So think about that and then help them find a better solution. So discipline. I can't say no. How do you say no to a kid with disabilities anyway, right? I mean, I knew of a kid with C.H.A.R.G.E who had 12 vacuum cleaners because he kept demanding them, and who could say no to him? I think Jacob at one time probably had the largest cush ball collection in the country because he liked them so much we kept giving them to him. But if he ever asked for one, of course we give him a cush ball, because how do you say no to a kid? That poor kid, right? They're so special and they want it so badly, and there's a little we can do for them. So no, that's called spoiling, and we don't really want to spoil our kids. So no pass on discipline. Because your child has disabilities does not give them a break on learning to cooperate with family living. They're still a part of the family, and the family has to find a way to regulate itself. How are we going to operate as a family? What are kind of the guiding principles that we follow as we work together as a family? And the kid has to be a part of that. And so allowing them to be inappropriately disruptive or demanding, or to smash things that belong to their siblings. I mean, those things really are not okay. I got another slide which gets into some ways of thinking about what to do about those things. But really important to think of that behavior as communication. What is the kid communicating by their behavior, or even to you, of what's going on inside themselves? That's really important. So as an example, Jacob, like a lot of kids, and probably all of our kids, those of your parents here, really loves to take a bath. Jacob would spend all day in the bathtub if you allowed him, or he actually has his own hot tub in the back porch. He lives in his own house, and he has a hot tub in the back. And so he would stay there all day. But before he moved to his own house, because now we no longer care, because there's a problem with the caregivers, but he always wanted me to give him a bath frequently. And it was a problem giving him a bath because I had to stay in there with him because he would splash and create a mess in the bathroom. And so if I stayed in there, I could keep him from doing that by telling him no very forcefully. But of course, he wanted a bath at the worst times in terms of my schedule, right? I mean, he would come and find me, and he'd find me, and he'd grab my arms. Oh no, he wants a bath, doesn't he? He started leading me towards the bathroom, and I'd start pulling him away, say, Jacob, let's go over here. And he'd keep pulling me, and I would start signing no to him. No, 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 no. And he kept pulling me and getting more and more upset, and have a bit of a meltdown or tantrum. I don't know which one it was at the moment, but he'd be very upset. So my wife said to me one day, and she's a lot smarter than I am, so it's really helpful to have her around. She said, Tim, does Jacob know that you know that he wants a bath? Well, yeah, I'm signing no. Yeah, you're signing no. But he doesn't know what you're signing no about. Does he know that you know that he wants a bath, and you're not just signing no about something else that might be in your mind? I thought that was interesting. And so the next time Jacob came and got me and we walked in the bathroom, I went right in there with him. Then I turned, I signed what to him, and he signed bath, and I signed no, bath finished. And he turned around and walked out. There was no anger, no temper tantrum, no nothing. He just walked out. And it led me to realize how much of the time we miss on our communications, both ways. With our children not understanding our communication to them and not understanding their communication to us. But it's really, really important to establish that communication with all of our kids, but our kids become the supreme challenge in terms of communication. And so it takes a lot of extra effort. The kids that work with Jacob in his house, they know many of his behaviors and what they mean. If Jacob walks around and turns on faucets and sinks and sticks his hand underneath them and sprays, he's in pain. If he sticks a sharp object in his neck and wrenches it against his neck, he has an ear infection. If he starts blowing, he has gas. Now, they're not 100%, but they're pretty good indications that you have to kind of recognize. And so they're not misbehaviors, right? They're communication. He's choosing these because they're helping him in some way. And next time you have gas, try just blowing bubbles with your lips and seeing how that works. Or raspberries, I guess we mostly call them. Okay. So behavior also has consequences. So I want to talk about two different kinds of consequences kind of quickly here because I do want to leave time. But natural consequences and logical consequences. So natural consequences are things that would happen if you did nothing. Doing nothing in response to a kid's behavior is surprisingly hard work for parents. You know, if a kid is refusing to eat because they don't like what you cooked or whatever, if you do nothing, you know, they'll either eat it or they won't eat it. And if they don't eat it, that's their consequence, right? That's a natural consequence. If you don't eat, you're hungry. You know, how often do we want to be that bad parent who says, okay, you don't want to eat, that's fine, but I'm so hungry later on? Well, you know, you made that choice. It can also mean some extra work around allowing natural consequences to take place, but they can be so powerful. I'll just give you one quick example. When I was a kid, I didn't care if my socks matched or not. It seemed irrelevant to me, no matter how hard my mom tried to get me to match my socks in the morning. But one day, and this was actually in 6th grade, I went all the way to 6th grade, the teacher was walking down the aisle and looked at me and said, Timmy, your socks don't match. And everybody in the room laughed. My socks have matched every day since then. That was the natural consequence. My mom trying to tell me, it made no difference. But the consequence of being laughed at, that worked. So think about, there's things we don't want kids to suffer natural consequences for, right? And our kids are special cases many times. We can't, like the kid pulls their gastrostomy button out. Natural consequence, well, you'll have to have it put back in surgically. We're not willing to do that. I wouldn't do that. Kid wants to run out in the middle of the street. No. You know, you might suffer the natural consequence of being hit, but we're not going to go there. That's why we have logical consequences. We have pre-established responses. So kind of like let the punishment fit the crime. It's teaching essentially cause and effect. If you do something, this is what happens. It should be related to the child's actual behavior and not just a random thing. So a kid, I'm thinking about typical kids. So a kid beats up his sister and you say, okay, so no television for a week. There's no relationship between beating up your sister, because I know I did it a lot, and no television for a week. So it doesn't make any sense. So it must be related to the child's action, must be revealed in advance. If you decide you want to beat up your sister, what's going to happen is that you're going to spend the rest of the day in your room, so you're away from her and can't be bothering her. Okay, that makes a certain amount of sense, but you have to know about it ahead of time. The child then chooses the consequence, right? I'll be in my room, like was the agreement earlier, or I'll come out and be, suffer the consequence for coming back out of my room. An example is splashing the tub. I mentioned that Jacob liked to splash the tub, and so I got wise, and I would sign to him no the first time. The second time, we got out of the tub. Right, so he knew he had one time, and he used it. But after that, he stopped splashing because he didn't want the bath time to be over. So logical consequence, it was hard to establish with him in advance, well, because of his communication issues, but he got it. With destructive and aggressive behavior, which is really a problem, right? Consequences don't work very well. We have to intervene right away with something very destructive and aggressive. But you need to stay calm. That's not easy. But if you get over aroused, it will increase the arousal of the child. You need to know your child and what triggers destructive or aggressive behavior. Is it changes in routine? By the way, a good calendar system can reduce that. Is it a chaotic environment? Too many people. We have team meetings for Jacob at his house, and he has about 14 caregivers because they're college students and they take shifts and usually have about 2-3 shifts a week. When they come over to meet at Jacob's house, he disappears. It's too chaotic for him. It can also be pain or illness can be a trigger. Can the environment be modified to minimize the risk? If we know the television might over-arouse the child, can we put the television someplace else where the child is not? Or can we limit the amount of time the television is on? So watch out for responses that you make to the child that increase the likelihood they will do this again, because if they like the response that I have to them, maybe I got really angry and they like to see me angry, I got to be careful that that doesn't reinforce the destructive and aggressive behavior. Okay, because I promised you 2 more slides. So I want to talk briefly about the marathon skills. If you heard me present before, I do this with almost every presentation because I really like them. Ann Turnbull was the stepmom of a kid with Down syndrome and a professor at University of Kansas. But this article I thought was really important. Raising a child with disabilities is not a sprint, it's a marathon. You've got to pace yourself on a marathon or you're going to collapse, right? So these are the skills you need to make it through the marathon. One is to meet basic needs. If you're not meeting your own basic needs, if you're not getting sleep, if you're not eating, if you're not even having a chance to be away from the kid and go outside and with friends or do some activity you enjoy, you're going to be worthless to the kid, right? They need a parent who is there fully with them and not suffering themselves. You need to know yourself and your family. Who are these people? Who are we as a group? What works for us? What does each individual contribute? Because remember, it's more than just disability in your family. Love your child unconditionally. The most important thing you can do is to be able to do two things simultaneously. One is to say to your child, you don't have to say it to your child, you can say it in your head, but if you never get any different, if you never get any better, if you never add any additional skills, you stay this way forever, that's okay. I don't mind. I love you just the way you are. The second thing is, I'm going to do everything I can possibly do to help you change, grow, develop, learn. It's hard to do those things simultaneously because they seem to be kind of contradictory, but they're not. And loving our kids unconditionally, we're fine with who they are, but loving them unconditionally, we want to help them become the kind of person that they can become. Establish relationships. We just can't have relationships at home. We have to have relationships with other people. It's a part of life. We're social beings. Experience and benefit from emotions. If you start to sob, you will stop sobbing at some point. You're not going to lose it. It will come back. And you'll feel better for having allowed yourself to feel the despair that you feel at that moment. And many of us raising our kids have those moments of extreme despair. It's okay. Take charge. We waited a long time for the case manager to come around and organize our life around Jacob. Never showed up. There wasn't one. Realized that Jacob was going to grow and develop and do well at all, we would have to take charge of that. And so we did. Not an easy thing to do, but who else is going to do it? Nobody. Anticipate future and transitional planning all the time. I said Jacob lived in his own house, which he moved into when he was 21. When he was in kindergarten, we did a person-centered plan, and Nancy said, someday Jacob will live in his own home. I rolled my eyes, thinking that'd be impossible. But, the possible is possible when you anticipate the future, anticipate transitional planning. Then finally, try to establish balance in your life. I don't know how you do that exactly. And if you figure it out, don't hesitate to contact me because I'd love to hear your views on that. But I know it's important. It's really important to have some balance. It's just kind of hard to establish in this world, I think. Oh, here, really quick video, and it tells me it's a bad one, but it's not.
Jake, let's hang out. Jake, come on, let's hang out, dude. Not today.
So respect communication, very important. Here's my contact information, which I'll leave there for a minute before I stop sharing, but I'm open to questions.
So Tim, this is Donna. I'm going to read what's in the chat box, and then I have a question for you too. My friend Brenda Mullins from Kentucky asks, how often is the adult behavior monitored and identified versus the child?
That's such an incredibly important and depressing question. I'm not happy with the way we think about adults with disabilities in general. And usually by the time they're adults, if they're still showing, significant behaviors from time to time, they really have that diagnosis and they're heavily medicated. rather than recognizing that there's really no demarcation between childhood and adulthood, right? I mean, it's not like you turn 21 and suddenly you're a different species. You know, Jacob's 31 now, so he's clearly in the adult classification, and we are paying attention to his behaviors. But in my experience, my experience is more with kids than with adults, right? Although it's just changing somewhat as the population gets older. I just don't see us doing a good job of trying to understand that adults are still making choices and their behavior is still communication, and we can still modify their environment to provide as nurturing and communicative as we can make it to reduce those behaviors. And they still, for heaven's sake, need a calendar system. Don't ever stop using a calendar system. I'm not sure that helped, but that's my thought at the moment. I'm going to stop sharing here.
So, Tim, this is Donna again, and I'm going to ask you a question from me. So a lot of times educators or families will be presented with some challenging behavior. Any thoughts on where to start? You know, because for them, a lot of times it's overwhelming in that time. Again, you talked about anxiety that can happen to the families and to the educators. Can you give us kind of an idea, maybe even just where to start or where to look or where to find information that might be something good to support them?
Well, the first thing I was thinking of is if you want to have a meeting at the school about your kid, have your kid bite somebody at school. That worked. Jacob did bite his caregiver once, and wow, we had a meeting the next day. So we could have set that up. The first thing you have to do is, this requires interdisciplinary, even transdisciplinary work. This cannot be left to the one-on-one intervener or whatever you're able to have. It can't not be left to the teacher. It's not the sole province of the speech language pathologist, right? Nor of the parents. One of the first things we have to recognize is that the parents know the kid better than anybody else knows the kid. And we have to trust and believe the parents. And if you leave the parents out of whatever conversations you end up having, that's at your own peril. It's just not going to work. And I can tell you that when trust is lost between parents and school, you can almost never get it back again. So don't let that happen. So then it has to come together, and it has to have people talk about what their best guesses are for what the child is communicating by their behavior. One of the ways that I do this is to ask people, what do you think if the child could put their behavior into words they would be saying? Would they be saying, I need to be left alone right now, or I feel like people are bugging me constantly, or I don't know what's happening most of the day, or I don't know, but if you can do that, and even if you're wrong, at least it's a way to, because if the kid then says that to you, what can you say to the kid? And if what you're saying back to the kid by changes that you make in the environment or in the program, if they work, then you were right. If they don't work, then maybe you were wrong. You go back to thinking about it again. There are programs out there. I've never been very impressed with any of the programs that are available. I think the most important thing that teams can do is to figure out why it's working for the kid and then what would substitute for it. I know that answers your question, Donna. I was kind of beating around the bush there a little bit.
So Tim, you do answer my question, and you hit it on the nose. And I think when you talk about behavior as communication, and I like that you say, can you put that into what the words may be? Because I think back to a time when I was working with a young man with C.H.A.R.G.E syndrome, and I was pushing him to do something. And the next thing I knew, he had punched me in the nose and I was flat on the floor. And you know what? I learned from that very quickly. He was telling me, listen, you're pushing me too much. I'm not comfortable. Get out of my face. So I like that you're saying to think about, we all talk about behavior as communication, but what would that communication be in words?
It's helped me. By the way, I'm impressed that you saw that as Because I've known other places that haven't. They take, they get even against the kid for doing stuff like that.
Mm-mm.
And that's just so sad.
Yeah.
So this is Marilyn speaking. Tim, you really hit on some very important key points, even for all of our, and it's so essential for all of our adult providers out there who are in the VR system or in a variety of other agencies that are on these webinars typically. We emphasize time and time again that collaborative work, you talked about interdisciplinary approaches and how important that is. I mean, we can't emphasize enough working with the DeafBlind projects, working with the families, really teaming this together and not just having one agency serving our consumers is really going to be truly successful. It's going to take a village, and it's a village even for everybody out there in today's society. So we truly appreciate your time and your information that you have given. It's extremely valuable. And especially coming from a parent perspective, I really hope everybody out there has really listened in on this and know that all of our consumers out there can really have a meaningful, successful life if we listen, sit back and listen. So our providers have gone ahead, our DeafBlind projects have gone ahead and put the evaluation up. Please take the time to go ahead and complete that evaluation. We truly appreciate your time and energy here in these webinars. Do know that if you have any further questions or comments, or you sit back and think about this session later on and you would like to ask Tim some questions later on, his contact information will be listed in the information that we send out to you with your certificate as well. And again, we are so sorry that the Spanish interpreting did not work today, but we truly appreciate your time, your energy, and your patience for being with us this afternoon. Tim, you have the opportunity to close out. And again, we thank you so much for everything that you've given us today.
You're very welcome. I hope it was useful. It is kind of a unique position being both a parent and a professional. So I kind of understand both positions, and that's why I believe so strongly we need to be able to come together. Please do not hesitate to email me if you have a question that didn't get answered. I learn more from trying to answer emails probably than anything else I do, so I'm delighted to get those questions. Again, thank you so much for having me, and I've appreciated being here with you. Thank you.